Thank you. 40 years ago, I was a freshman at West Virginia University, and I sat in lecture halls much like this. And until today, I didn't realize that you really can tell when people are sleeping in the back row.
No pressure.
You know, I'm checking time, so I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm a very lucky man. I've only been in this business. I was a forester for much of my career, and I've only been in this business, I don't know, 15, 16 years. And I am going to name some names. A guy named Robert Baldwin brought me into the business and taught me a lot about it. A guy named Mark Clark from Washington hired me into this job with NASCA. But the reality is I've had a lot of mentorship from many of the folks in this room. Guys like Tom and Leonard and Astor have treated me far better than I deserve and been very patient with me. State cons all over the country have not only helped me and taught me, but they've become my true friends. Jane, I can't tell, I just love to listen to everything you say. I'm really just trying to wake her up. I love listening to everything you say because everything that comes out of your mouth is profound, and I am paying attention. But most of all, I think I've learned the most from the NASCA officers and our board of directors and our members, and that's only fair because I spend more time with them. But every time I get together with those folks, they teach me so much, and the lessons they bring are from the real world. Now, having said how many mentors I have in this business and in my role with NASCA, I would like to talk to you for just a few minutes today, not as a NASCA representative, but as a landowner. My wife and I have a farm in Delaware, and by many of your standards, you would call it a postage stamp. We have 183 acres, although from what I heard this morning, Brian in West Virginia, that makes me above average. And I can remember in 1982 going to work for the state of Delaware, making $11,000 a year, and 10 years later going $500,000 in debt to buy this farm that I now call my home, and it was scary, and I didn't inherit it. It wasn't a family farm. It was a piece of ground that I purchased, and we've made it our home, and I will tell you, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears have gone into the place, but it's paid off, and we enjoy it every single day of our lives. But the perspective I'm going to bring to you today on conservation planning is not necessarily from a bureaucrat or an executive director of a national nonprofit. It's as a landowner who struggled hard to buy a piece of ground. That ground means something to him. So if I ask you the question, what are the motivations for implementing conservation? The list could be tremendously long. This certainly is not comprehensive. But there's a few things that are probably pretty obvious to all of us. I'm looking at that got changed a little bit. I'm calling your staff, Ron. I'm sorry. So this is the first time I've read this as well. You know, it was my slide. We'll go with it. Because one thing I had on here, and this refers to stewardship ethic. Oh yeah, the next slide is right. And I think what I had called this is human decency. Do you remember that, Ron? Did you even look at the slides I sent you? I don't. Ron's one of my dear friends who, again, very cerebral, and he's taught me a lot. But this whole piece that you can call stewardship ethic, I call it human decency. But as a landowner who gets to interact with other landowners, not just in Kent County, Delaware, but over this entire country, what I see is a sense of real human decency that I don't find many other places. And when I think of conservation and the people who are doing it on private lands, this is, and I don't know these pictures, this is something off the internet, but this is the picture in my mind. Okay, no, I did this one. So far, we're 1 for 2, Ron. But this is the type picture I see. And I have to tell you, I don't have a lot of patience for individuals who preach how it should be, but have not reached in their own pocket and invested in the landscape. And perhaps I'm a little overly sensitive there, because, in my mind, I have, even though it's small potatoes to many of the folks in the room. But when I look around, I see the people who, A, might be trying to scratch out a living off the ground. They're feeding Americans and people around the world, but at the same time, somebody just said it, that conservation not only benefits what's on that farm, it benefits our entire community. So let's talk about some disincentives for conservation and conservation planning. And the first one is a big one to me, and that's regulation. And again, I'll grant you it's a personality flaw on my part, Jane, but I don't do well with ultimatums, and I like to think that I can go out and do the right thing on my own, and I don't like it when people try to shove it down my throat. Especially when those people are the type that have never been off the sidewalk or the concrete, and want to try and tell me what to do. So I much prefer, as a landowner now, I much prefer a voluntary approach, hopefully with some incentives associated, but even if there are no incentives available, I much prefer the voluntary approach. If you tell me what the right, educate me, okay? Don't dictate to me, and I'll do the best job I can for you. Certainly costs come into play, and with commodity prices, sometimes we've seen where commodity prices rise and some land is pulled out of conservation. But again, those are opportunity costs for putting land into conservation. So let's never apologize for wanting or needing for our ag production to be profitable. It's got to be profitable to have enough of a budget line to pay for conservation. Another disincentive might be simply ignorance or unfamiliarity with conservation practices, and that's our job. Now I'm stepping out of that landowner role and back into the partnership, but our job to educate those folks. And again, a role just like Brian, you said the folks in West Virginia thought education was so important. Here's a place where it really is so important. Let's educate folks and instill that culture for them to do the right things on their own. And finally, change is different, you know. Grandpa did it this way, Pop did it this way, and we've done it this way for a long time. And sometimes it's just hard to get people to commit to a change. But I want to tell you a quick personal story, and then Ron, I'll turn it over to you. But this is my farm, and you've heard me yammer on before about the RSET tool and the evaluation they did on my farm a couple of years ago. I was one of the early test sites, so I'm not going to go into that today, although I have to tell you, I think it's one of the coolest things out there, and it was a real eye-opener for me on my farm. What I want to share with you today is a conservation plan that was written for my farm in the early 1970s. Anybody, and those of you who were in Indianapolis a couple years ago, I apologize because you've heard this before, but I'll be brief. Let's see. Yeah, in the middle of that, it's a little hard to see, but there's a house, there's actually a 1.7 acre inholding where the woman who used to own the farm, she and her husband owned the farm, she's still alive and still doing very well, lives very independently at age 96 today. And my wife and I make it a point to go visit with her every single day. Simply, and she's in great shape, but at age 96, it can't hurt just to keep an eye on things, okay? She's a dear friend of ours. We go visit with her every day, and one evening we were over there, and she pulled this conservation plan out. And she goes, I thought you might like to look at this. And as she's pulling out, I go, what do you got there? She said, oh, this is the plan they wrote for the farm a long time ago. And I looked through it and I was fascinated. And I said, Sue, thank you so much. I thought she was giving it to me because at this point, I had owned the farm over 20 years. And essentially, and she was probably 94 at the time, but essentially this at the time, 94-year-old woman who weighs all of maybe 100 pounds gave me that. Said, no, you're not, I told you you could look at it. I'm not giving it to you. This is ours. And the point I'm making here is that NRCS and the Kent Conservation District in the early 70s, and if I would gladly let you look through this, I'll tell you, it's really not that techy. It's nothing, I don't think there's anything that any of you professionals would be excited about in here. But what it represented to her, and still represents to this day, 20 years after she sold that farm, was a land ethic about she and her husband and her family, the way they lived and the way they treated the land that they controlled. And it was powerful and it was cultural, and we're guilty of in past years and out of necessity, not pointing any fingers of blame, but in some recent years, we've written some conservation plans that were designed to satisfy contracts